Hello. Thanks for joining us. My name is David Malone.
And my name's Ian Stroud, and this is Hyperland.
Hello, Ian. How are you?
Are you having a little laugh there, sir?
No, I'm deadly serious, mate.
How are you?
I'm all right. I was hoping we could talk more about Ukraine
Yeah, okay.
and about some of the press coverage that's gone into it.
Oh, are
do you
you
think?
you bashing the Guardian again? Or
I'm afraid so. Well,
it was
yeah.
either that or the Torygraph.
No. You happy to talk about Ukraine?
Of course I am. Yeah.
Okay. I just think there is something worrying going on. There is a lot of saber rattling, don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought the Guardian has sort of been interesting about this whole business because Simon Jenkins, who's a real stalwart of the Guardian, and sometimes I like what he writes, sometimes I don't, but he's had this piece, an opinion piece, which at least he comes out and says it's an opinion.
Yeah.
Because so much in the Guardian masquerades as news, but it's nearly all editorial.
Yeah.
And so his piece is called, it's from Monday the 15th. It's worrying to see the Prime Minister cheerleading for war. Will Ukraine turn into Starmer's Iraq? And I think it's an interesting and intelligent piece because he is just saying, look, why has Starmer come out and made such a big deal about opposing Russia in Ukraine? He's saying he wants to see British missiles in Ukraine fired deep into Russian territory.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
I mean, that's not NATO policy, and even the Ministry of Defence and the wonks of Downing Street had to come out later and say, well, that's not actually current UK policy.
Yeah.
I mean,
sounds a bit like Tony, doesn't it?
Well, exactly, and I think that's the point that Jenkins is making is, looking back, we can all see that something weird happened with Blair.
Yeah.
And he becomes some kind of evangelizing Christian zealot, and he was happy to back up W on anything,
Yeah.
non-existent weapons of mass destruction and the rest. What is going on with Starmer? Is this
was this before NATO or was this at the NATO meeting that he came out with this?
Yeah, I think so.
Right. Okay. It sounds as if he's trying to cement friends.
Well, he pledges $3 billion a year for Ukraine.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we shouldn't support Ukraine, but $3 billion a year, just no questions asked. It dwarfs some of the budgets for British things.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of money. And it's not as if there aren't lots of things that need doing here.
Yeah.
And then making this really hawk-like, we should, essentially he's saying, I want British missiles to expand the war and have a direct confrontation between NATO / the UK and Russia. Yeah. I mean, what else is it? What else is he saying other than I want British missiles fired deep into Russia?
Yeah.
There's something really weird about that, especially because NATO had said that it feels Ukraine's war should be strictly defensive. So there's something very, very weird going on there.
Yeah.
I can't understand why he's doing it other than to cozy up to America, but it seems a really flagrantly dangerous way of doing it. I mean, why not just, say, we'll eat all of the lousy chlorine-drenched chicken that you want to send us.
Yeah.
You could say that. That would please America too. And poison us slowly with American chicken.
Well, it kind of there's a report in Reuters as well. July the 17th, 4 decades ago, the United States deployed cruise and Pershing 2 nuclear. Is that right? Pershing 2?
Yeah, Pershing, yeah.
Missiles in Europe to counter the Soviets' SS-20s, a move that stoked Cold War tensions. But now they're sort of saying that the states have sort of said they're going to put missiles in Germany.
Yep.
Poland have come out and sort of said we might shoot down missiles that fly over Ukraine. So there's definitely an intensity. There's a ratcheting up now.
It does feel like we're more than tiptoeing into the kind of stupid situation that held before World War One, where everyone ratchets up their sort of ambitions and close off the ability of states to withdraw, to pull back.
But is this go ahead? Just a quick one, yeah. It was reported on June the 28th. Putin said publicly that Russia would resume producing short and intermediate range land-based missiles.
Yeah.
Something that the West thought that he was doing anyway. So is it not a follow-on? Is it a bit of a I'm rattling my pram over here while he's rattling his pram over there?
Yeah, it is. And the timeline becomes too tortuous if to play the game of, well, he said, and so we were only responding to that. No.
Yeah.
I said that, who is egging whom on? That seems a futile game to get into. The question is, who is actually trying to diffuse it? And the answer seems to be nobody.
Yeah, nobody. Yeah.
And then you get Trump. And of course, the attempted assassination on Trump. I mean, if Trump wasn't going to win the election, which I think he always was going to, now he certainly will. And everyone has analyzed the picture, the sort of the amazing picture which came out. And of course, I can't see how he doesn't win now.
No.
But then just today,
what did you take of that?
Of what?
Of the shooting.
Well, it was one of those things that, I mean, you and I have muttered about it for months, that was some lunatic going to try and take a pot shot at him, because the rhetoric surrounding Trump is so extreme.
Yeah.
He's the devil incarnate. He's everything that's wrong. He's, and all his opponents have been guilty of using quite inflammatory rhetoric.
Yeah.
All about fighting this and fighting that. So it always seemed possible that
there was going to be
would take the rhetoric too seriously.
Yes.
Especially in a nation that has got lots of guns and lots of people who like using them, and they are prone to shooting each other, the Americans. I mean, 10,000 people plus die every year from being shot by some other American.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're just glad that he didn't die. I mean, from a purely personal point of view, I don't want to see anyone being shot particularly. No. But also that would have you'd hate to think about what that would have done. But now, of course, you've got him. The latest thing there is that they're saying, again from The Guardian, Trump's choice of Vance. Yes. Terrible news for Ukraine. Europe experts warn. And this again is, this is my gripe with the Guardian. The news is Trump chooses a man called Vance.
Yeah.
For his vice president. So then you could give us some news about Vance, as he's,
No, what we could do is dredge out some things that he said 2 years ago and put that into your pipe.
Yeah. Okay, so that's fine. J.D. Vance, let me tell us who he was, what he did. But already in the title of the piece, you've brought Europe experts warn
Yes.
that it's terrible news for Ukraine. So you could say, well, that's just news, but how many experts are there in the world? And they've chosen one particular Europe expert. And it's from something called the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies. All right. Well, it's part of Stanford University.
Right.
So on the face of it, it's okay. Said Michael McFall, director of the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies and a former ambassador to Russia. Okay, so they've chosen a Europe expert, and it's from this particular think tank or Institute for International Studies. First thing you need to know is Stanford is a really quite right-wing place.
Right.
It has the Hoover Institute, I think. My dad had some dealings with one of those institutes at Stanford, so then I dug into it just because I was interested, and I thought, okay, this is really properly dug into the center of. It's quite globalist and it's right wing and fairly hawkish as far as I could see, although they do have peace studies and the rest of it, but quite right wing, and that's fine. But they quote from this fellow, and the best bit is this. This is quoting Michael McFall, the director of the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies. Says, this is a quote from him. It says, President Biden's foreign policy strategy radically contrasts with Mr. Trump's approach. Biden and Harris have promoted democracy and stood up to autocrats. Trump and Vance have paid no attention to advancing democracy abroad and instead have embraced autocrats. The contrast in foreign approaches embraced by these two presidential candidates has never been clearer in my lifetime. So Biden and Harris have promoted democracy pretty much the way that previous American presidents like Obama have, by dropping tens of thousands of tons of ordnance on them.
Yeah.
And of course they stood up to autocrats like Biden has stood up to Netanyahu, and the way that they absolutely have stood up to the leaders of the Communist Party of China over the Uyghurs and over everything else. I mean, they have just let them know who's boss. They have had no truck with them, have they? Or Saudis.
I was gonna sort of say, I was gonna bring in the sort of Chinese, because that's what the Reuters article that goes into sort of China's capacity, missile capacity. They're sort of between 300 kilometers and 3,000 kilometers, and they've got like 2,300 of them, and a further 500 that can travel 3,000 to 5,500 kilometers. And then China were also, were they not in Belarus doing some mixed training on the Polish border?
I think so, yes, yeah.
I mean, it worries.
Yeah, but my point is that they're quoting this fellow, as their chosen Europe expert.
Yes.
And he's trying to pretend that Biden and Harris, they're all on the side of democracy. And like I said, when he talks about promoting democracy, it usually means bombing them and reducing. Like, we brought democracy to Libya, didn't we? By getting rid of a terrible autocrat. Yes. Or you could describe it as having bombed them back to the Stone Age and left the country in a state of irreparable civil war.
Yeah.
We've done the same in Iraq. We've done the same in Afghanistan. And the notion that somehow Biden and Harris, these great champions of democracy, stand up to autocrats. Well, the Saudis don't seem averse to actually physically chopping up journalists that they don't like, and then trying to dissolve them in a bath of acid.
Yeah.
But I don't really remember Biden or Harris standing up to that kind of autocrat.
No.
So I find it. I mean, it's. I can't quite. It bothers me that here's a newspaper pretending this is journalism, pretending it's news. They have their Europe expert warns terrible news right in the title. They've chosen a particular Europe. I mean,
Yeah.
they're not. They haven't quoted someone else.
Yeah.
In the famous balance, they've just presented this person as this. This is what experts about Europe say.
Yeah.
And then got this fatuous quote from this man, and there's no analysis of it. It's just presented to you as, well, this is obviously what experts think. Whereas, if you, in the latest edition of Le Monde Diplomatique, you have another Europe expert, this time David Tetry, who's a researcher at INALCO, which is France's National Institute of Oriental Languages and Civilization.
Yeah.
And the author of a book called Russie, le retour de la puissance, Russia, the return of its strength. And he takes a completely different view. He says the West has badly overestimated the impact of its sanctions on Russia, and quotes lots of facts and figures, and basically says the sanctions have not worked. If anything, they've actually helped Russia.
Yeah.
Because by cutting them off, it's a very interesting point which I hadn't thought of. All the sanctions have essentially operated like a foreign imposed protectionism, because now Russia's homegrown industries don't have competition from foreign industry.
Yeah.
Which is what protectionism would have done. But this has been imposed on them. And contrary to all of the neoliberal naysayers who cluck like headless chickens whenever anyone mentions protectionism, according to this article and this particular expert, if you're to be able to believe his facts and figures, the foreign imposed equivalent of protectionism has really helped Russia.
Yes.
Well, and he points a much more positive, not positive in the moral sense, but he paints a picture of the Russian economy that's much more robust and healthy. But my real point is that he's also a Europe expert.
Yeah, but with a completely different viewpoint.
Right, and so I wouldn't have a problem if the Guardian said, "Here's Mr. Mr. Michael McFall, Freeman Spogley Institute for International Studies, and his opinion is," and then gives us his utterly fatuous quote.
Yeah.
And then said, in contrast, of course, other experts say, and then quote the fellow. But you don't get that in the Guardian. And
do we? Well, no, but we don't really get it in any. Yes, we keep slagging off journalists, and I kind of forget that in some ways you have been a journalist. You have been somebody who have looked at different things, and you analyse them. And I mean that article, he talks a lot about BRICS, which I keep going on and on and on and on.
And you're right.
It's just strengthened it. I mean, it's Saudi now. They're not dealing in the dollar. They've got China and India as well.
Yeah. And also, remember when they cut off Russia from SWIFT, which is the international payments business.
Yeah.
And this was said with this kind of, ha, now we've got them. So what did Russia do? Russia set up their own one.
Yeah.
And all of the credit cards that had been issued by Western credit card industries like
Visa, MasterCard, American Express.
Exactly. The Russian system managed to make it so that those cards could continue seamlessly, but using the new Russian equivalent of SWIFT.
Wow. And
they have continued to export their oil and gas.
Yeah.
And they, like you say, the BRICS are now a growing power, and it's no good just going, "Oh, well, that's so terrible. Oh, isn't that terrible?" It's the world.
Yeah.
And diplomacy and foreign relations are about saying, well, what is the nature of the world, and how should we tailor our policies to the realities of that world to try and advance what we think?
Yeah.
But that's not what we're doing at all. We've got this myopic, ill-informed, idealistically blinded saber rattling,
Yeah.
which, if it goes wrong, it won't be Starmer's family or or Mr. whatever his name was,
The Guardian man.
Michael McFall's sons or daughters who go to die. It'll be ours.
Yeah.
It won't be the people rattling the saber who pay the price. It'll be ordinary Russians, ordinary Ukrainians, and ordinary members of NATO.
It already is, and with the likelihood of Trump coming in and his comments about NATO and spending per GDP falling. It's supposed to be 2%, and the UK is sort of Labour is sort of saying, oh, we'll go up to 2.5% soon, sometime, not too sure when. But Russia now is, I think, 7%. I mean, the thing is, I mean, it's sad because looking forward, I mean, that's not going to help the Russian economy at all. Spending 7% on, but it can.
Well, maybe, but it's like American's economy has always been helped by its military spending.
Yeah, but that's because they go around.
Well, so I mean,
dropping.
I agree. Spending 7% of your GDP on armaments is not going to be helpful. But what it's doing in Russia is it's stoking a domestic industrial boom, and people are getting paid. And you could say, well, they're not earning foreign currency. Well, of course they are through sale of oil and gas. But it doesn't matter. Russia can print up its own currency, and they won't get hyperinflation, despite what various ideologically committed
why would they
say.
Why
they just won't.
Yeah.
Because as long as you have a growing economic base, you can print up money, and you won't get hyperinflation. And the evidence for that statement is in.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and now I think since Trump is going to win, and now he's got this, both Trump and Vance are saying, we just want an end to the war. Yeah. It raises for me further what we've been saying for a while, which is I think at some point America will sue for peace. So the only question is whether the European members of NATO are going to block that.
Yes.
Because if they do, fine, then the whole nonsense carries on and more Ukrainians and Russians can die. But if they don't, then the time is ticking for the peace talks to get going. And if Trump is going to win, then even those who oppose Russia would probably want to get those peace talks started soon, because once Trump's in power, they've been negotiating from a position of weakness from their point of view, because Trump is going to the table saying, I want there to be peace.
Well, 1987, Gorbachev said to Reagan, we can be proud of planting this sapling, which was the declaration that they weren't going to continue in the creation of more and more bombs and weapons and things, which may one day grow into a mighty tree of peace. Well, look where we are now.
Yeah, well, and I understand people saying, but Putin invaded. Yes, he did. And what you want to do is to find a way for him to
back out, save face.
Back out,
save face.
And and you're not going to do that by saying we want our missiles to be fired deep into Russian territory. That is not any kind of gesture towards finding a peaceful solution.
Yeah.
And those who just say, well, you can't possibly allow him to keep 1 square inch of the Ukraine. It may seem like ideologically that's the pure position to take, but I think it's just a recipe for war and a recipe for further deaths.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think I wouldn't want them to keep any of the sovereign lands of the Ukraine, but you can't just be that stubborn. Like you said, you're not leaving any room for.
Well,
Interesting.
The people who want to be ideologically pure, and who say, right, not 1 inch should be allowed to remain with Russia. If they really continue to push it, they're going to be the ones with blood on their hands.
Yeah.
They're going to be the ones who prompt some kind of limited nuclear exchange.
Yeah.
And I hope they'll feel great about it.
Well, interesting.
Anyway, there you go, mate. I thought it was worth having a chat about that.
It was, yeah. I don't know.
Then we'll figure out something else to chat about next.
Well, at least you're pulling up the Guardian anyway. Yeah. I mean, this,
and I would say to anyone who hasn't tried Le Monde Diplomatique, it's apart from the fact it is just a quality publication in its own right, it is just a really healthy corrective to what has happened to the Guardian.
Well, I've started.
I think it's worth looking at.
That's where I got the story last time about the Uber journalists and how we're sort of seeing a failure in journalistic output.
Yeah.
All right,
and I'd just like to say, before anyone thinks that I'm just a supporter of either Trump or Vance, I hate their most of what they had to say, and I really dislike their attitude towards what's going on in Gaza, and I can't see it's going to be any good. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm somehow cheerleading for either Trump or Vance. I'm not. I'm just taking exception to other people's idiocy.
All right, mate.
Anyway. All right. Talk to you on the next one.
All right. Thanks, David. Thanks again for taking the time to listen.
If you enjoyed that, you can head over to Substack or YouTube.
Maybe leave a review. But also tell us what you think.
What you agreed with, what you disagreed with.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much.